Hello, and welcome to Game & Read.
We are here today with our discussion video for our March pairing. For the month of March, we played Batman Arkham Asylum, and we paired it with 3 Batman comics. We've got Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth by Grant Morrison, Arkham Asylum Living Hell by Dan Slott, and Arkham Manor by Jerry Duggan.
Now, in case you have not seen our introduction video, we did one at the beginning of the month. Go look at that for just setting up what these books are, what this game is if you are somehow unfamiliar. I guess there's a totally reasonable chance you'd be unfamiliar with the comics at least, or the game if you're not much of a game player.
You might not know anything about Batman.
Additionally, we discussed this on our podcast last week with our good friend Nick Daly, who's a big Batman fan. So if you want to see a more conversational take on this, go onto either iTunes or the blog, gameandread.com, and you can find that podcast episode there.
In this video, we wanted to focus on Arkham Asylum as a character. You may be thinking, Arkham Asylum is a house.
I've never thought about that.
Never?
It's not a house, it's an asylum. And in the game, it's a huge complex on an entire island.
It is, by the way. That was super disorienting when I first started playing the game, and I was like, I thought that this was a giant house. I got turned into an asylum, and instead it's like a house, but then also a million other things.
It would be a little boring if it was just a single building, unless it was a really, really, really big building. Plus, then they wouldn't have any of the outside parts.
I guess that is true. Either way, whether it is a whole island or just the house, Arkham Asylum is a character in and of itself. It definitely has personality. In A Serious House on Serious Earth by Grant Morrison, we learn the story of Amadeus Arkham, who founded Arkham Asylum, and from that founding, we really get a sense of the macabre fascination Amadeus Arkham and then subsequently sort of Arkham Asylum has with death and insanity and just disturbing darkness.
Murderous, insane people.
Right. Which, is interesting because, as we were discussing earlier, every prominent person in Arkham Asylum is a murderer.
At least in the game and the 3 books we read.
Right. So it's not just... So it's Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane. It's like criminal insanity, okay. However, everyone is led by their insanity to murder, or murder leads them to insanity, I suppose. One way or the other.
I think they were all insane before they murdered people. At least in the stories we see the backgrounds of.
That is true.
That seems like a pretty clear distinction.
Okay, so their insanity leads them not just to crime generally, but to violent, murderous crime, which is disturbing. I mean, it makes the Arkham Asylum environment kind of feel dangerous because of the people and the acts that are contained within it.
It's the idea that if you are there, anyone might just kill you for absolutely no reason or no logical, understandable reason.
It sort of flips the idea that like the people inside are defining the space, and instead Arkham Asylum is not defined by these people but inserts itself into the lives of everyone who walks in.
Yes, and this is definitely brought to prominence in the Living Hell comic book, where a financial criminal is sent to Arkham after he pleads insanity and it happens to get through. He is transformed from this big shot financial criminal into the most terrified man, and then eventually into almost a monstrous embodiment of the asylum itself. Going to the asylum kind of made him crazy, but also fit in with the people around him who are also certifiably insane.
He is an interesting balanced fish who turns into shark. I think shark.
Yeah, I can't remember. No, wasn't his last name just White? Because he called himself the Great White Shark, and then everyone started calling him Fish.
Yes. So, and then he goes back to Shark at the end after he's turned into an Arkham Asylum.
He looks a lot like a shark at the end. Spoilers, I guess.
But he is I think a really great example of the agency of Arkham Asylum itself. Because, like Peter said, he comes in, he's not a violent criminal, he's a financial asshole who committed financial
Ponzi
crimes.
scheme.
Right? So, like, yes, people probably died or were harmed, as generally is the case, but tangentially, not directly. He is not the murderous, insane man that everybody else in Arkham seems to be, and yet that's what he is at the end. He is a violent, insane guy, and he is literally transformed by the asylum, which just really, I think, is a great example of the personality and the character that is in the asylum.
I think if you wanted to do a logical framing of this, you could frame it as he went through so many traumatic experiences, it'd be odd if he wasn't harboring some sort of strong mental illness at the end.
100%.
Well, even by Batman standards, things got a little off the rails in that book, which, if you go back and listen to our podcast, we get a bit more in depth about some of the not so great plot twists that book takes.
Yes. It's crazy. But it's a great example of the power of the asylum as a distinct entity.
Yes. One thing I think I would like to distinguish between the three books we read, of the three of them, I would say Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum book was probably the one that most realistically showed a cartoonish, well, not comical because it's not funny, but this kind of take on insanity. Obviously, there are people who have mental illnesses and then go on to do horrible things. There are plenty of people with all kinds of mild mental illnesses and things that don't cause harm or anything like that. And in Batman, it can become very black and white, where it's like, oh, these people are crazy and insane, and that's not necessarily a good lens of how to look at this. But in Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum, I think that's with how they treat Two-Face specifically, and the way he is undergoing treatment and how that's affecting him in many times negative ways, was probably the most interesting take on maybe how insane. Like, I didn't study psychology or psychiatry. I know very little about proper mental health. However, that one felt the least pandering for making kind of big bads, whereas in Living Hell there are a lot of characters that are like, let's make a bunch of crazy people.
I do think that in Living Hell, Humpty Dumpty fulfills that same function, and that I think he shows this, like I felt, and you listen to the podcast, I talk all about it.
You really like Humpty Dumpty.
I feel empathy for Humpty Dumpty in a way I don't feel empathy for other inmates at Arkham. I do not feel the same empathy for, like, Jane Doe or the Joker or Bane or Death Rattle. I don't feel any empathy for those people, and yet Humpty Dumpty, I think, much like Two-Face in Grant Morrison's book, demonstrate the complexity that is possible in the asylum.
Well, and I think part of that is because they go into his background and explain the traumas he went through in his life that kind of led to his kind of going off the, comic book insanity rails. And they definitely build him up as an empathetic character, because they really don't show him doing anything bad except for the one thing he did that landed him there.
Which was, anyway.
Well,
we should not rehash the podcast discussion. Go listen to it, because we hashed it.
But I'm saying they do frame him in that you can see the steps that led him, his journey to the asylum makes more sense to people, I think, than other characters they have there. And so that's, I guess, a credit to Dan Slott for making that character.
I agree.
Now, the other thing we wanted to talk about in this video is how the world of Arkham Asylum in these comics and the game relate to Batman, the character himself. And I guess the way I want to dive into this is make a statement about the game. So in Arkham Asylum, one of the many things littered throughout the island, there's a handful of things you can collect, Riddler trophies. Obviously, you're going on various missions where you're like, okay, got to do this thing next, got to do this thing. But littered throughout the island, there are these giant stone tablets that have
a beetle.
And weird inscriptions around them, and you decipher them, and they are the lost history of Amadeus Arkham, the founder of Arkham Asylum. And in it really paints this almost ghostly idea of the spirit of Arkham Asylum, and it also points that it may be currently in Quincy Sharp, who is the current warden. What's the term for it? Like head.
He's the
He's
warden.
the head of Arkham Asylum.
Yeah.
However, I think that's a bad argument because Quincy Sharp is not a very good character in my opinion, and I don't think represents the deep-seated, unhinged nature of Amadeus Arkham, who, I will give a brief spoiler just for background, was a psychiatrist, tried to treat this serial killer ends up killing his wife and daughter. He ends up murdering that serial killer in an electrocution therapy thing, and then starts killing a bunch of other patients as well, ends up being locked up in his own asylum.
Womp womp.
Yeah, so he tried to eradicate the criminally insane in Gotham by just murdering them. So I think it is more interesting to make the argument that Batman is the slightly more perfect version of the spirit of Arkham. He hopes to eradicate the weird, like, strangely large amount of insane criminals Gotham has. However, he will not stoop to murder. Batman does not like to kill at all. It's one of his major traits as a hero, as an avenger of sorts.
And in that, he is in juxtaposition to Arkham Asylum and its inmates in a very clear way, that where all these people are insane and murderous, Batman refuses to murder.
However, he, by many people's accounts, might be a little insane. He understands that going off that edge and saying, you know what, the way to fix this is just by killing them, is kind of that thing that'll push him over the edge into true insanity. And it's really interesting in the third book, which we haven't mentioned yet, which is Arkham Manor. He goes undercover into the new Arkham Asylum, which is in his former home.
Because, you know.
Wayne Manor, because, you know, derelict mansions and such.
That one is just one building.
Yes.
Just to make that clear.
Well, I think generally it was depicted as one building, and then the game was like, you know what, we need more space.
We need an
We'll make it a
island.
giant estate. Anyway, in that he goes undercover and starts to actually kind of fit in as an inmate. So
He passes well.
yes, he doesn't have to put on a lot of airs. He has dealt with enough of these people and deals with, I think, some of the same drives they feel, where, you know, geared towards vengeance, kind of violent displays of power. But he doesn't go to that. He doesn't cross that line of, and I'm going to kill people.
Right.
So I like to think of Batman as the proper, and I'm sure there's somebody who's written better things about this, as the, you know, progress of the spirit of Arkham, but, you know, not stooping to the inner demons of murder to solve a problem.
Yeah, I think Batman is a nice, like I said, is a nice juxtaposition to Arkham Asylum and its inmates, and it really, they kind of help define each other with each other, right? Because with this idea of Arkham Asylum and the spirit of Arkham, Batman, the personification of that through Batman, and yet without this key piece that is so core to the people who are in Arkham, they really, I think, is this nice complementary relationship in a really disturbing, dark way.
Well, and the spirit of Arkham and how it ties to Batman and Gotham as a whole, I think gives it a very deep mythos feeling. So while a lot of this isn't super literal, people aren't saying, and then this ghost inhabited Batman, and that's why he's all crazy. It's there without being a literal spirit. It's just kind of, oh, his motivations feel very similar to this and the way he's driven to do this, and it just adds some nice depth to Batman outside of being a cool guy in black who beats up bad guys.
Agreed.
So I think that's all we're going to do for this video. Once again, if you want to hear more about this discussion, check out our podcast, leave us a comment, we will reply, because why not? We like talking about stuff, especially Batman. He's fun to talk about. You can check it out on GameAndRead.com, and the podcast is also on iTunes at the Game and Read Podcast with an ampersand.
You can find everything else that we've done at GameAndRead.com, and you can follow us on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Game and Read, all spelled out, / Facebook has the ampersand. It's all there. You'll find us.
Thanks for watching.
We'll see you next time.
I am the knight.
No, you're not.